And Lierre Keith is co-founder and board member of Wolf. She's a radical feminist, food activist, environmentalist, and author of the highly acclaimed book, The Vegetarian Myth, Food Justice and Sustainability. The title of their talk is Who's Afraid of Judith Butler? And it's about how San Francisco TERFs protested a talk given by Judith Butler, handed out information about men in women's prisons to attendees, and we're able to ask an impertinent question that unmasks the underlying homophobia of queer theory and the sacrificing of lesbians in favor of men's rights.
Gail Rubin presented a paper called Thinking Sex at the infamous Barnard Conference. And in it, she argued that sex is oppressed. It's not people that are oppressed, it's sex, because, poor sex, it suffers so. Society creates a binary between what's normal and good and what's abnormal and bad. And she knows this is a problem because, I'm not making this up, no one will defend the, quote, boy lovers, so the men who want to rape children. And this is some kind of tragedy. So we need to break down these binaries between what's good and normal and what's bad and abnormal, because men want to rape children and they're not allowed to. You can go read this article. Okay, I'm not making any of this up. I couldn't. And this is considered the founding document of queer theory, because the queer theorists went on to build this entire edifice called queer theory. And this is their main kind of, their main framework. Oppression is not one group materially exploiting another, but the act of labeling anything in a binary. That's the problem. It's not that some people have power over others. It's the binary. So the categories are the problem, all right? Binaries have to be deconstructed through what's called queering. So you transgress the boundaries of categories to render them meaningless, okay? And this to them is liberation. So this is queer theory in a nutshell. So that happens throughout the 80s. And then we finally get to Judith Butler, and this was her big book, Gender Trouble. So that came out in 1991. So this is the basics, what's in this book. It's a hard slog. You should read it if you can, but it's somebody said it's like wading through cement, and it basically is. We can't name men as oppressors. That's, quote, too totalizing a gesture. It only strengthens that binary. The category woman itself is the problem. There are no real women. Woman is nothing but, quote, a parody without origin. When women unite as a group, they are only reinforcing a problematic category. So women cannot be the subject of feminism. She says that point blank. All we can do is have subversive performances of the self that breaks a binary. So for instance, women refusing men, creating a new life or even a new sexuality with women, that only strengthens the binary. But you know what's subversive? Lesbians who have sex with men. That's what she says, because that queers the category of lesbian. So Butler destroyed the possibility of feminist resistance for an entire generation of college-educated women. She's barely understandable, but she did do that. So what's organizing? You make common cause with the people who share your condition. That is impossible when women don't exist. And when noticing that they might exist only strengthens that big bad binary. This is her latest book. It's a critique of us, very specifically of us, of feminists who reject gender ideology. And then the slide after, so that's the cover of the book. And then the slide after that is a quote directly from the book where she says, "Why is freedom so frightening? Is that even the question? Or is it rather, how has freedom been made to seem so frightening that people find themselves longing for authoritarian rule?" So yes, she calls us not just authoritarians, but fascists, because we're all so afraid of what's going to happen when, the gender binary breaks down. The entire book is about this. So this is another quote from the book. "The weaponization of this fearsome phantasm," see, we're living in fear. That's our trouble, is we're afraid of gender. "This fearsome phantasm of gender is authoritarian at its core. Rolling back progressive legislation is surely fueled by backlash, but backlash describes only the reactive movement in this sense. The project of restoring the world to a time before gender promises a return to a patriarchal dream order that may never have existed but that occupies the place of history or nature, in order that only a strong state can restore. She says point blank that we're fascists and we're authoritarians. This is the argument of her book. So then she did this interview, and the subject of prisons does come up. So this is a quote from this article. The interviewer says, in prison, does Butler accept that people assigned male at birth can't be placed in women's prisons just because they identify as women? And she says, what would it be if if it weren't self-identification? Who is our expert authority? Well, she's right, is that this is all nonsense, and the only metric is an internal feeling state. That's what gender identity is. So I guess she and I agree on this point. I just think it's ridiculous, and she thinks it's good. Butler argues that trans women should not be seen as uniquely risky. Well, she's wrong. In fact, men who ID as women are more dangerous, and a much higher percentage of them are, in fact, sexual predators. Male prison guards are a risk. So what she's saying is women are already going to be raped. What's one more? And so are other female inmates. So that's the classic. Women do it too. And it's trans women are placed in a male prison. They, quote, will be raped and will be hurt. So men are allowed to be afraid of male violence, and they're allowed to demand protection. Women have to be the human shields. Aren't we missing the reality of male on female violence? Asks the interviewer, and goes on to say, in the UK, 99% of female rape victims say the perpetrator was male. 95%, 93% of convicted murderers are men. Aren't women just less violent? And she says, you would be surprised at how many women are battered by their mothers, and what in church settings or family settings get sanitized as discipline. So yeah, women do it too. So no need to care about men raping women, because women are terrible as well. So it's all just shifting posts and then just sort of sweeping it all under the carpet. None of it matters. These are the people who have made it possible for men to be put into women's prisons, right? And so I want to talk about the situation, particularly in California in the women's prisons. This is the situation in California specifically. We had a law passed called SB 132. It took effect in January of 2023. And it said that any man could identify into the women's prison. And immediately 300 men got on the waiting list. And they were shocked that this happened. Shocked. I don't know why anybody would be shocked. You don't even need to be a feminist. Common sense would tell you that a bunch of men are going to want into the women's prison. My group, Wolf, filed a lawsuit on behalf of 4 of the incarcerated women. Then what happened is there's this man, Tremaine Carroll. He is a sex offender. He was put in the women's prison, and he was given permission to join our lawsuit as an intervener. And what that means is when there's a court case, you have the 2 parties that are arguing. And sometimes a third party comes forward and says, this is going to really affect me, but neither of these parties is actually arguing from my perspective. So I would like to be a party to this. And the court sometimes says, sure, you can be what's called an intervener. So we got an intervener hanging on here. His name is Tremaine Carroll. I will repeat, he is a sex offender. He's a rapist. He kidnapped 2 women and was part of the rape of these women. He is already in the women's prison. And he said, oh, I want to be an intervener. And they went ahead and told him, yes, you can be an intervener. All right, fine. Who's defending him? Lambda Legal and the ACLU. They're on his side. On May 24th, the court dismissed our case on these gets complicated, procedural grounds involving the 11th Amendment to the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. But they gave us leave to amend the complaint to change so that we're not, well, anyway, it's not hopeless. The legal team is working on this day and night, and we're going to get the court case kind of back on track. But in the meantime, like literally on the day that we are down at the court protesting, what happens is Tremaine Carroll, this man, is being charged with 2 counts of forcible rape and 1 charge of interfering witness tampering, trying to terrorize one of these women not to be the witness against him. Meanwhile, the judge who threw our case out, who dismissed our case, said, sort of as a throwaway, that it was all conjectural, that the harms that we were suggesting would come to women were conjectural. Literally on that day, he has his arraignment in court for raping 2 women in the California prison. But we are told this is just conjectural, right? I mean, my head is just exploding here. So that's where we are in California. Yeah, it's happening, and people don't believe us. They say this can't be happening. It's too crazy. It is happening. It's happening so badly. We have a court case trying to sue California to make it stop. And indeed, this man is up for raping 2 women. Oh, and one of them is pregnant. We, of course, don't get any press on this. The mainstream media still refuses to cover it. You can go to the Wolf website and read all about it, which we'd really appreciate if you want to educate yourself about it. And then the final slide that I have is we do get some feminist press, and I really, really appreciate the women at Redux and everything they do. But this is pretty much, all we get is just the feminists who already care about it, hear about how horrible it is, and we still can't break through to the mainstream media. So my final slide. So we decided that there's this great, the women organized in San Francisco in the Bay Area because Judith Butler was coming. This is why we have a problem with Judith Butler, why I was really happy to go to this protest, even though it was a 7-hour drive for me.
Are you guys attending?
Yeah.
Thank you. We just don't want men in women's prisons. Why do you think that's okay? Why do you think it's okay? Are you? Ask the questions. Self-ID is a myth. All men are men, all women are women. Judith Butler doesn't even make sense. Listen to her words. She doesn't even make sense. Have a great time at the show. One of the things she said was only men and women in the world. Yes, for sure. Hey guys.
Nope. You don't need consent. You know who does need consent? Women who are in women-only prisons, but males are in the... Oh no. The truth sucks. It's scary. Protect women. Women.
No males in women's jail. Do you think men belong in women's prisons? Judith Butler does. Men being women's
Why are men in women's prisons right now?
I'm not gonna shut up. Women are getting raped right now. Only men can get women pregnant in women's prison. Judith Butler. Only men can get women pregnant. There's a lawsuit right now. 2 women have been pregnant and raped. And then identifying in women's prison. Yeah, I get it. Butler supports that. I get it. Please ask her about it. I will. Thank you. Thanks for talking. Please look into this. The most vulnerable women in the world. She hates them. $400,000 for word salad at UC Berkeley. I would love to. Come on back and talk. All right, let's have a talk. Come on.
Why don't you get back in there and debate Judith Butler then?
She can't debate. She's a word salad queen. This is true, though. You didn't.
And I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk about what happened next once we got there.
We have such an incredible group, and people are tuned in to all kinds of stuff around the world. So somebody makes a suggestion and we jump on board and say, let's go. And somebody in our group said, hey, Judith Butler's coming to San Francisco. And I remember when I was in anthropology class at my college, I had to read a lot of Judith Butler and Foucault. I remember Foucault as the main guy I had to read. And of course, this was a long time ago, guys, and I did not know what was going on at that time. I was, I wasn't a wise 50-year-old, that's for sure. 55 now. But Judith Butler's terrible, and the most I can remember about her is that she just spouts word salads and nobody understood what the hell she was talking about. So I was willing to go protest just on that basis. But then knowing how much she hates women, I was really excited to go to this one. We had a great group of women there, and we decided, one of us, brilliant, the one who kind of brought it all up, designed a bunch of cards that we could hand out with quotes from Judith Butler that just were batshit and showed how much she hated women. So we had people handing out cards, and then a bunch of us holding signs, and a couple people videotaping. And we just tried to talk to people as they were walking in. Mostly they just sneered at us. But some just approached me and flipped me off or said, "You're haters, get out of here." They just really, really didn't like us. And so I just kind of started asking questions and just shouting out, Judith Butler is a word salad. And why would you pay to see this woman? She makes $400,000 to spout word salads, and she hates you. And I would pick out lesbians because I could tell, because I have a gaydar. And I would say, hey, you're a lesbian and you're super cute, but Judith Butler hates you. Please don't go in there. But they did anyway. So that was the beginning. Not a lot of engagement, but I think we sauced people up a little bit, and people were inside and they had carded like the bathrooms and put our messages in there where people could find them. And apparently a lot of people read these cards. I don't know what all the questions were, but I know that Amanda was able to get in a question pretty early on, I think.
Amanda came out in 1976 during the emergence of the San Francisco gay liberation movement. She spoke at the Kelly J. Keene Let Women Speak event in 2022, where she met members of the San Francisco TERF Central. Her book, The Unexpected Penis, is a primer on trans ideology from a lesbian perspective. Julie Lane is co-founder of San Francisco TERF Central, former college scholarship athlete, lesbian Democrat, San Francisco fighting for sex realism.
I hadn't actually planned on going in to see Judith Butler. I mean, why was I going to pay to be abused? I never read any of Judith Butler. But I did catch up with her by reading Sheila Jeffrey's book, Unpacking Queer Politics, sorry. That was very helpful. And it helped me to catch up with how queer theory had taken over feminism, and told me everything I needed to know about Judith Butler as well. So it wasn't intending to do anything but just listen and take notes and critique what she was saying. But because we met up before, we were having dinner, and one of our leaders said, "Oh, you must have a question because you're the most likely to be called upon, being, intersectional." So I was like trying to think of, well, what kind of question? Because I'm a lesbian, I was in the opportune position to ask a question as a lesbian. So I looked at the card that we had made up of all the quotes that were pertinent. And we had the quote, "What is the wound to lesbianism if the category of women is expanded to include trans women?" So I was going to challenge her on that. Why then couldn't we lesbians just have free spaces? And I was coached on it. I'm not an avid public speaker. It scares me to death. So Derek Jensen was there with Lierre, and he was coaching me and rehearsing me to go in, which helped a lot. And then our founder, who had suggested I formulate a question, was telling me, "You need to put your hand up right away." So I was prepared and went in. I also chose my outfit to, be non-binary. I had heard that non-binary people like to dress in pirate shirts and Victorian costume, kind of borrowing from male attire from the past. So we happened to be taking photographs in front of the Judith Butler poster, and a man walked by who asked, "Oh, are you going to see Butler?" And we said yes. And it actually turned out he was the man who was the usher who would hold the microphone. So he already had an idea of who I was, and he possibly thought I was a fan. So I was called on first as soon as the Q&A was announced, and I shot up my hand, and we were in the front row. So that helped a lot. So he came to give me the microphone. And since I had been listening to what all she had to say, it just made me madder and madder that she was characterizing feminists as part of the right-wing and that we were irrational, we had irrational fears. And I also mentioned that I have a black belt and have been training for 30 years. So it wasn't male violence that I feared exactly. I just was coming from a perspective of why can't we socialize as lesbians in penis-free space? So that's how I came to pop the question, as it were.
If gender is to liberate us, why can't I, as a lesbian, have a dick-free space? A space that is for women only, without penises.
Do that in your home.
Exactly.
I mean, I hope and trust that you don't have a son with a penis, but I think you are free to say that. You're free to say it here, and you're free to say it out loud. I do wonder, maybe you wonder sometimes too, about what is the danger of the penis exactly? I mean, I understand the revolting and abhorrent character of rape. I understand that women can be raped by a man with a penis, or other men can be raped by a man with a penis, but those same women, those same men may also love somebody with a penis or feel loved by them. The penis is not the dangerous instrument or the source of violence. It's mobilized in the service of violence under certain gender norms, under certain gender regimes, where men are taught to be a certain way, or where boys are raised in a certain way, or where the culture and the society, which is full of militarism and violence, encourages that. I think that we don't, at least I don't, reduce people to their anatomical parts or their biological parts. They're given meaning and they're given power within the worlds in which we live, but because as a feminist I believe in rebuilding the world of power in the direction of greater equality and freedom and non-violence, I think that it's really important to see that those who do have penises, men, women, non-binary people, all of them, live with them and live them in different ways, and some never in relation to violence. So maybe we need to think a little bit more about where violence comes from, because like you, I don't want to be threatened by violence.
She basically hung herself with her own words, and we were on it. We had it on our Twitter feed the next day, and it just took off. And so I got in the Daily Mail with just our tweets. Nobody called us or anything to get my opinion or what. I had already tweeted what I felt about the event, so that seemed to be enough to get me in there. And one of our Women Are Real tweets mentioned my book, The Unexpected Penis Conversations on a Gender Trail, which granted me 7 sales. So even being viral, people don't go to books exactly. But I was very pleased that I had made such an impact, that by this confluence of having so much support and circumstance, that extra ticket still needing to be claimed, being right place, right time. And that was basically it. That's the story.